Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the American Scouser podcast. I am Gally, filling in for Timuchin, who is somewhere gallivanting across the country. Yesterday, I think he was in San Francisco, and today he's in Vegas. And clearly, he just is able to take a lot more time off than me and you, Paul, especially at this time of year. But good for him for getting on the road. Good for us for being able to, well, yes, to BJ's point, probably skip that damn segment altogether. But Paul, before we get to it, we missed you last week. How's your new year? How's everything going for you?
Good. Feels a lot like last year, which is pretty crummy so far, but we've got lots of time to make up for it.
We do have time to make up for it. So before we go jumping in here, though, and start talking about the Wolves match and some of the other topics that we have for tonight's program for everyone, I would quickly love to get your stance on, I know the Brentford match was a week ago, but it was such a capitulation, and in some ways it was almost a microcosm of everything we've been talking about for months. Teams sitting back, being better prepared to play us, having a plan B that we just don't seem to have. Any quick inputs or insights on that Brentford match, things you wanted to get off your chest? Because God knows, everyone that's been on Facebook has seen some of your opinions out there. But for all of our listeners, I feel like our listeners deserve to get a little bit of your rant as well.
It's really because on Facebook I can't be silenced. Well, I mean, I guess technically I can, but you still have to see it originally before I'm blocked. Fair. I don't know, man. Like when you said we were going to talk about this, right? Like you're texting back and forth today, and you said we're going to talk about this. Like I had this momentary internal dialogue where I was like, "Am I blacking out during these games?" Because I literally can't remember large swaths of entire matches, which usually I feel like we live these details, right? So I was thinking about it. It's it's the same game on repeat for the last year and a half. It feels like. But I mean, I think when you look at it, we look at the things that stand out. I think we talked about the big stat that's come up in the last week is the fact that we're third worst in the league in big chances conceded throughout a match. And I'd say that's pretty accurate considering that a Brentford team that was without a guy that makes up of half their goals was out, and they still put 3 by us, and they look like they could have put 7 by us. I think that's probably pretty true. So, why is that happening? I mean, if you remember the title year was a year where we got a 1-0 lead. It could have been the 5th minute of the game, and we felt good about that. Game over. So, what's changed? And then we look at the numbers that keep showing up about how this team is 15th in the league right now and distance covered. And that's when we look at a Jurgen Klopp side, it was this high press, gegenpress, heavy metal football, run your tail off. And then you say that this team's 15th in the league in total distance covered. I mean, I think these numbers are just confirming what we've been saying for a long time. And that's that the brakes have been beat off this team over 60-plus comps a year, over multiple years, with summer competitions in there, in little rotation. And to me, I mean, we can get into a discussion later. I just think that this team hasn't ever seen the iteration. I think it should have evolved past what it is now. The entire midfield should have evolved. We should be looking at the next iteration of the great Jurgen Klopp side that won our last Champions League title, and it never evolved. And I don't know if it will, because if you look at Jurgen Klopp historically at Dortmund, exact same issue to a T, and we can get into parallels later, but it's the same scenario, and it never evolved. And I just don't know if he's capable of doing it.
Yeah, we are going to get there. It's a big part of tonight's show. I wanted to get your input on the Brentford match because for me, the Brentford match was, it was really like a level end of frustration. You made the comment, it was like Groundhog Day, or it's New Year's all over. It's last year, it's this year, it's all the same. It does just feel like it's match after match, and it doesn't matter what we change, nothing. The result is the same. But the truth of the matter is we're going to get to it. We never change anything. And I think that's where my frustration is coming to. So one thing that we're going to change, but BJ ruined my joke, is we're going to just skip right the hell over trivia because when Tamuchin says, we don't need to embarrass the two of us.
I saw a sign come up. My heart fluttered a little bit.
I figured before we get into anything, well, I'm going to do this. Here's your trivia question for this week, Paul. Can you guess whose birthday it might be?
Oh, man. That's some Brazilian guy named Lucas Leiva.
Yeah, and it I'll tell you what, we couldn't have this version of Lucas because unfortunately for Lucas, for anyone who lives under a rock, he was forced to retire earlier this year back in Brazil as he was trying to wrap up his career. I'll tell you this. We could use some cover for Fab, and I would take this guy in his prime to slide into that role. And let's be honest, Fab might be covering for him if they were in their prime, to be fair. Yeah. But both played really big roles, but I saw it was his birthday today. So before we got into anything too depressing, I thought, what better way than to say happy birthday to an absolute warrior? And the thing about this guy was it was never pretty, right? But you knew what you were getting in every minute of every game, every match he played, effort, determination, passion for the badge, and real leadership on the pitch. Something as we go further into this podcast, I think we're going to get to a little bit because I'm starting to question where the actual leaders are on this pitch and wondering if in some ways some of these mentality monsters weren't a little bit of front runners when it comes to it's easy to be a leader when you're winning. It's a whole nother thing to be a leader of men and champions when things are going the way they have. So let's get into what was just another disappointing afternoon on Friday. I mean, Saturday afternoon, sorry, might have been maybe the most disappointing, in my opinion, of the matches I've seen in a long time. And for me, I'm going to be honest, it started right with this lineup that came out. So before I give you any of my insights or opinions, the lineup comes out. It's 2:00 Saturday afternoon. You've watched an entire wonderful afternoon. You've yelled at all of us to get out of bed and start watching the amazing FA Cup third round action. What did you call it? The greatest day of international football? Wasn't that or European football, something like that?
I do love these rounds. I must confess that I thought this was one of those rounds that went to extra time and penalties, which is like, to me, is awesome when you've got like 40 games and half of them are going to penalties. So that's fully what I was expecting. I was like, I jumped the rounds, man. So I have to brush up on my FA Cup rounds before I start making big comments on Discord at everybody.
Fair. So your opinion when the lineup came out, obviously he goes strong. Can you tell me why?
Well, I think it backfired. I think the reason why is that you're trying to get a response and have something to have confidence with going in, knowing that you're going to essentially have 9 days of rest, something we haven't seen in forever. So on the premise of that and the philosophy, like the lineup, obviously in hindsight, we can feel differently about it. But at that time, seeing this, I like that call. Now, you said something that terrified me. You were like, yeah, he says, he's going to go strong the rest of the competition. And I'm like, love this here. Don't love it for the rest of the competition because, as we've discussed at length, the priority is top four. Because if you don't make top four, there are some seriously negative ramifications for this club. And so all of these other things to me are complete extras, especially since the money from these competitions is essentially less than a place on the Premier League table with the TV payouts.
So let's take it. We have time here on this podcast. Let's kind of take it segment by segment. We'll start with the back line and Ali and Net. From a man management standpoint, can you explain to me how Kelleher does not get a start in this match?
No, especially on the precedent you set for playing him last year, the way that you played him. And I would hope that he would be able to look up and see a yellow kit and know not to pass it to it. So
Yeah, I have to be honest. I almost felt in some ways, not that Allie hasn't made enough small mistakes. And listen, if it wasn't for Allie, we'd be,
Yeah.
below Chelsea right now in the table.
Yeah.
So no one on here starts slamming in comments. Please jump in with your comments. And while we're at it, we'll say hello to our good friend, Alan. Greetings from Houston with you. I'm assuming this is with you in spirit, but not in body, just not well. I don't know if that's Alan saying that he's just not well because of the way Liverpool is treating him. But I know Alan has shared with us sometimes that he has had some health issues. So if that is the case, Alan, everyone here at American Scousers cheering on you. Hope you feel better. Hope things get better and do well. We miss you, and we need you on here from Houston. And you should give BJ some shit because no one's supposed to beat you to the first comment. I thought the people in this channel by now knew the rules.
I didn't think the chat actually activated until Ellen came in, and
that was pretty much how I thought it worked too, other than the fact that we just delete all the comments of people saying things like, Gally, will you shut up? Gally knows nothing. When does Gally blink his eyes? And the answer is not often, especially when he's angry.
In fairness, a lot of those are my burner accounts.
Right, exactly. Those are usually the nights when Paul's not here. Those are the nights I have the most commentary. But as we looked at the Alley thing, did it put any pressure on him? And I'm not saying he makes that bonehead mistake, but he didn't play well over the 90 minutes. His distribution was poor. He had the moment in the first half where he's fighting with Robertson. Robertson's waving his arms at him. And we're going to get to that too. Like some of the things we're starting to see on the pitch. Guys telling Henderson to F off. Guys yelling at the keeper. I think at one point Fabinho basically waved his hands like this at Klopp in the middle of the match. Like, what do you want me to do? You have me out here with, Thiago, and we'll get to Thiago and whether or not, that is still the same version of Thiago that we purchased or the version that is now here. I think that's a little bit of that topic for the wheels coming off later on and some of the running this down and some of the parallels to the past. I think Thiago draws one of the greatest parallels that you could have to the kind of that prior Klopp era. And we're going to get to that. But I personally felt like Ali looked like almost like he was surprised he was asked to start the third round tie of the FA Cup. Like it didn't make sense to him while he was playing. He didn't seem to have good communication. I've always struggled with Matip and Konate as a pairing. I don't love it. I don't like Konate on the left compared to he is on the right, which is a big problem, seeing that the veteran won't allow him to play in his best position. And then our fourth choice center back also doesn't play in that position. So it's just a catch-22, it feels like. They put him in a tougher spot. So for me, it just felt disjointed from the beginning. When we look at that midfield, we know what Henderson, Fabinho, and Henderson, Fabinho, and Thiago can bring when in unison and playing well. But again, coming off of arguably being the most influential player on the pitch against Brentford when he came on, can you explain to me why Thiago had to start a 6th consecutive match for Liverpool and Keita couldn't start?
No, and I also can't tell you why the entire midfield outside of Thiago had 2 tackles and he had 6. Like, that's not the look that you want in that situation either. Like, so I think Thiago's an interesting one because I think that I don't think there's been the drop off that you've seen with Hendo and Fabinho that in Thiago. I think Thiago has kind of maintained what he's always been, which I would argue is world class. I mean, he's getting older, but I still think he has that. But like the things that Thiago, the things that Thiago does well, you can't do when you have players like Fabinho and Hendo at their ages in the form that they're in. That's the problem. If you've essentially neutralized the only midfielder that's playing at his level by what's around him right now. And it's just really tough because like the disjointed play, it's not because these guys don't know each other. Remember when it was like these guys played like they knew where they were thinking about being before they even thought about it? It was wild. It was like telepathic the way they moved. And like, I think what's happening is like, there's an inherent lack of confidence and ability right now. And part of that comes from these guys are humans. They feel the weight of this thing. They know what's happening. They know that this thing is coming apart at the seams, and they feel that, right? The other part of that is while that's happening, they're being asked to do things from their manager that they're not physically capable of doing anymore. They're not physically capable of playing. And this goes back to lack of plan B, lack of change that you were discussing at the beginning of the pod. Like, this comes from the fact that we're not changing anything. And that's fine if you want to be stubborn about it. If you don't want to change a philosophy and you don't want to change a tactic, you have to change the pieces if they're no longer able to do what you're asking them to do. And we haven't done anything. We haven't asked for change. We haven't thought about change, and we haven't replaced the pieces. So, like, it no longer there's a cog in the machine, and that's just your inability to move on something, to be quite honest. And like, I feel for these guys because you can feel the frustration across the squad, and it's just an inability to change and a lack of awareness in knowing what these guys are capable of right now, because they're not capable of it.
David Leslie says we need a midfield reboot. I mean, yes, Captain Obvious, but we agree with you 100%, Dave. And thank you for sharing your comment. It's just so glaring and frustrating. And I know we've been saying it for a couple windows, and you and I have given both ownership a little bit of a pass at times. We've also been more critical on Klopp maybe than some of our listeners have, or other people in our Discord channels. At the same time, I think we've been realists that COVID played a big role into this. I think there were plans, but other clubs and clubs with less financial clout than us have been able to make moves, and they're securing players. And, we always talk about City, and we used to talk about, the checkbook manager. If we really line up their business the last 2.5 years, their last 3 transfer windows are basically what we did to the rest of Europe for the, windows 3 through 6 ago, where we never missed. We sold everything high. They have been buying players at right prices, selling youth academy for profits, and reinvesting. And when a player doesn't fit, like Ferran Torres, they give him 2 years and they make a profit, or Sane or Sterling. And they're going to do it again with Gundogan, and then they're going to do it with Silva. And, we all talk about all these different moves, and we criticize them for that. But there's clubs like West Ham that are out there spending $100 million, but are also selling players for profit. And I know I've been banging this drum that we've just allowed too many players over the last 5-6 years. It's that over loyalty, and we're going to get to that whole entire thing of being too in love with the squad or too in love with the memories of the squad. Because I honestly don't believe that Jurgen Klopp actually loves this squad anymore. Because Curtis Jones didn't get to play in an FA Cup tie. He played with the under-21s the next day. Okay? Like, if he still loved the guy and thought he was still a big part of this, he would have gotten out onto the pitch against Wolves. He would have found his way into these match day squads. And he doesn't even fight to give these guys shots. But these are the players that were basically the people blocking the entranceway from new acquisitions coming in. We waited for 3 years to, as with Timuchin not here tonight, let's have a great opportunity to talk about Ox during the championship winning season. We waited for 3 years to try to get Ox from the championship winning season back because he was so important. The problem was he had 2 major injuries, fell 4 rungs down the totem pole. And now this morning I got to wake up and read, because he's had 3 starts in the last 90 days. They're talking about maybe extending a contract to him so they could maybe secure a fee. I will lose it if they give any of these guys money. And I don't want to hear that, Keita could save his Liverpool career. If you wanted to save Keita's Liverpool career, Jurgen, you would have played him from August till December, and you would have put him on your Champions League roster. Now, we all know Keita pulled some shit in the summer. He was trying to angle for a move out, and Klopp tried to bury him. And he thought Harvey Elliott could carry it. He thought Carvalho could play in the midfield. And I'm sorry, all of you kid apologists. He was wrong on both fronts. Neither are ready to be in our midfield. Honestly, I'm not sure either are actually ready to even play the number 10 role if you ask them to defend, because they both get muscled off the ball. and it's a tough spot to play in his system. So we've worked our way back, right? We started with the back. We came into the midfield. How about up front when you see, once again, it's Ox, Nunez, Mo?
I mean, this is why we got Gakpo, I would imagine, right? Until the injuries to Diaz and Jota resolve themselves. And I have major concerns about what version of Diaz we get back, considering that it's a similar injury twice to the same area. So, I mean, I think that really solves. I think that's why we see Gakpo. But I mean, at the end of the day, as supporters, we want to know why something happens, who's to blame, right? And I think the easy narrative has been, well, it's an inability to back Jurgen Klopp from this ownership, right? And it's a lack of investment. And then on the other side, I think what's not looked at and should be looked at is, how does Jurgen Klopp actually operate with transfers? How does he operate with the squad, right? Well, one of the criticisms is that he's slow to change, he's stubborn, and that he works with a smaller squad. Those are things that work for Liverpool at the time that they were building the squad. Less with more has been a mantra that this ownership team has definitely run with, and with for good reason, right? Now, if you're actually objective about how we've done business, the sell to buy age of sort of Brendan Rodgers, what we were doing when we were getting the likes of players like Markovic in and things like that, that there was a definite philosophy shift from that to what happened when Coutinho was sold. If you're honest about it and you look at what we did, there was a definite philosophy change. Even though Coutinho went out the window and that money funded a lot of moves, from there we went to Fabinho, and we put significant building blocks that were close to finished pieces into this side. And I think that Jurgen Klopp, I think the responsibility of this entire situation lies firmly on both sides of the fence, because I think you have a manager who is an excellent leader, a builder of men, a culture changer, but has never seen a top side get to its next iteration. He's never taken his top side into the next generation or next version of that squad ever, from Mainz all the way through Dortmund. And it's very similar at Dortmund. He lost a key midfielder, Götze. Who got the blame? The ownership, because they said it was a short sale and they didn't have a plan B. I'm sorry. Same with FSG. If you don't have a plan B, that's on you as an ownership team, because no player is expendable. In this situation, Götze came in and basically demanded a move short sale. They went off the Bayern. Klopp saying he didn't have enough time to find a proper replacement. That's on the manager too. If you're a manager, you always have to have that next guy in mind. And so it starts with the key midfielder, Götze. At Liverpool, I think it was Gini.
Yeah, we're gonna get to that parallel in a few. I do want to just kind of touch on the Wolves match, because I think we do have to just review it, mostly because, well, poor Kelly has heard enough about what I saw that day and gone through my overwhelming frustration. So you made one of the comments I felt was honestly one of the funniest things I read all day in Discord, and then I had to reread it and realize you were serious, which was, before we get to we finished talking about this whole lineup, let's touch on this bench, because I think your exact response was it's a scary world. I would rather Wolves bench today than ours. And when I look at this bench, the first thing I thought to myself was, other than the fact that Keita should be starting, and maybe why did you sign Carvalho if he can't start a match round FA Cup match against Wolves? Because to be honest, if he's not ready to play against Wolves, he should be on loan at Wolves, period. Mm-hmm. Or Crystal Palace, or he should be in the Championship. Hell, he should still be at Fulham, letting him get seasoned. And, who knows? They'd probably be 4 points ahead of us instead of tied with us on points if Carvalho was still there. But to me, there wasn't a match winner on that bench. There isn't a change. You realize how much you miss Bobby. Obviously, once again, Jota always gets overlooked on this squad of superior talent because he's he's a goal poacher. He just shows up and pops up in the box and scores. Well, Sometimes you need someone to pop up in the box and scores. The other thing he does is work his tail off at every single spot on the pitch that you put him, and he pushes everyone else around him to play. But we've touched a little bit on Ali's mistake. Clearly, it's just an absolute bonehead mistake. I, for one, probably assume that his hair was just not properly done. Had his hair been a little bit in better shape, I don't think he would have made that pass. I digress. But take the first goal aside. I think we can't move on without at least acknowledging Darwin's finish and how important that goal was. But let's really, the class of the ball, but more importantly, for me, was the mentality of the player, because the moment the ball went back to Trent, Darwin started the run and had his hand up. He wasn't thinking about getting behind and using speed. He was thinking about that ball coming over the top, him getting his body in position in a perfect spot and burying it. It comes off his shin. I almost argue that makes it harder, because you really have to have your positioning and your body right to actually slot that past the keeper in that spot. And let's be honest, if Darwin smashed that thing laces, it probably would have ended up 6 rows wide, because right now that's how things are going for him. Couldn't have been happier for the kid, and you could see the relief on his face. But I always weigh it on this. He wasn't the happiest. He might not have even been the 10th happiest Liverpool player on the pitch when he scored. And for me, that speaks volumes about what he's doing to acclimate with his teammates, how hard he's working on the training ground, and how hard these players know right now life in England is, being compared to the best striker in the world purely because of your price tag.
I mean, I love this kid's mentality. When you think about what he's dealing with from an outside perspective, like, I'm trying to think of a striker who's come into the English Premier League lately and gotten this much just absolute bullshit thrown at him from like other fans, media, about being. And the only thing that I can think that comes close to mind is Timo Werner, but like he's a lot older and he wasn't scoring like at all. Like, but
he could speak English,
right? Like, this kid's coming in as a kid, not knowing the language, brand new league. He's scored like 9-2 or 6-2 league goals and 10 starts, and people are like calling him this flop. You don't ever hear about, nobody's talking about Anthony like that over at United. No. Like, so
Sancho,
yeah,
Sancho isn't even in the squad.
It's like, not only does it not make sense from a standpoint of he's faster to his goal ratio than Sadio Mane and Luis Suarez. Like, I mean, he's like, his ratio for goal involvement is up there with the greats in the club in their first year. And like, he's like on all the flop lists. It literally makes no sense. I saw a list today that was rating transfers that rated Sadio Mane as good. Sadio Mane has 1 more goal than he does, the same assist ratio, with 2 more starts, and is currently out injured in a 1-team league where they roll other teams in the best side in that league. And he's been rated a good transfer, and he's been rated, like Nunes was rated a wait and see, something like that. It's like, well, dude, like, it makes no sense how he's being evaluated.
Yeah. I feel like it's a click argument. I think at smaller clubs, we've seen it a little bit. You saw it with Joelinton at Newcastle, purely because he was a record signing and he was supposed to be a bigger signing. The name is just completely escaping me now. At the time, it was the guy who went off to oh man, it's going to irritate me, who was at West Ham and then went to Ajax, had the great year, went to Dortmund and had the cancer, had the great year too. Another one that was a record signing and just didn't make it here. And then last year led all the Champions League in goals scored. We've seen this in the Premier League. At big clubs, I think you see it as well. But the idea that anyone ever called, Lukaku a top striker after the runs that he would have at United and Chelsea, Barron, and they gave Nunez basically a month and a half And because Holland did do something that most people don't do. He walked into the Premier League and arguably was the best player at his position. And there's not many people come to the Premier League and do that right away. Right. I mean, I didn't think Holland would, to be honest. I still thought that at this point of this season, we'd be talking about Harry Kane being the best all-around striker. Now, I think if we actually looked at body of work and who they play with and how they play and what they bring to their sides, I'd still argue Harry Kane's a better footballer than Erling Haaland is every day of the week.
You could argue that Harry Kane stepping into that City side brings them more to that side than Haaland.
I was the big one that always said I thought we dodged a huge bullet when Kane didn't go to City, because I honestly think that Kane dropping deep, playing with De Bruyne, would have basically gave them the ability to play as fluent through their wingers with their false nine mentality, while also having the most clinical number 9 England's ever had. So I think they'd be a better side. Do I think eventually Haaland will take them to a new level? Maybe, but I also think it'll be 2 years from now and he'll be playing at Madrid. But that's an argument for a different day. So it's 1-1. Obviously, we concede the second. Hwang gets the goal. Or actually, we take the lead with Mo's goal first. What are your thoughts? Should it have been ruled out for offsides for Darwin playing the ball? I know this is where I love that Temujin's not here, because he would have sat here as a defender and told us that he's forced to go defend and therefore that should be offsides. I felt it wasn't. I could have understood if they chalked it off. What were your thoughts on that one quickly?
I mean, that's the problem with it. The letter of the law says that he's offsides, but the letter of the law also removes gray area, right? So, like, to me, it's not. To me, it's not offsides. And I don't think if you actually interpret the rule correctly and how it's being applied nowadays, and that's the big thing, is like we look at these rules, but how are they actually applied? I think the application of that rule, I think it's onside. I think it's a legitimate goal.
So Hwang, scores his first goal since, I think, what was it, last May or something like that, or last February, for Wolves, after he came as a January signing and scored a few goals, and they thought they had something to build on there. And like all Wolves players, they get embedded in and understand that they don't speak the Portuguese language, and all of a sudden it just doesn't work for them. I swear they just take away the meal card and like make you like just show up. Like they're just sitting there with like Babbel on their phones trying to figure out Portuguese all day, somewhere in Molineux. It's always great. You find a spot in the Midlands where you have to be able to speak Portuguese. But
culture shock, I'll tell you.
I still can't understand how the third goal doesn't count. I understand they're telling us there's no angles. I thought I saw about 5 different angles. The announcers seemed like they just felt like the guy missed it on the pitch. Is this just down to the fact that he raised his flag and it was just so close without the great angle? Because to me, why have VAR if you can't get an angle inside Anfield to see offsides? Like, to me, that's just a...
We've seen VAR do this when we needed the center. Like we were missing a camera angle from the center that one time. So we've seen shinks in this. I personally thought it was off because it's coming from the original position of him directly after he takes the corner kick, takes that deflection off the head. And it looked to me like he still hadn't made it. The problem is we are as viewers, we're basing that off the crown of his head that we can see on the TV. We can't see anything but below like this. We can't see.
Right.
So, and we all know that all it takes is like a fucking 4-foot elbow or something. Like, so we don't get to see that. And that's just another one of those things where, like, from a commentating standpoint, it's funny because you can tell with the commentators, it's the same thing for them. There's a lack of transparency for everybody. None of us know what's happening. And that's a real problem because the commentators, have to work around it. And they have the hard job, really, of working around it. But from what I saw, I thought that the crown, like from where his head was positioned, that he was probably off. But like, dude, it's one of those things where we just didn't get enough evidence while they were showing it. And I can see why Wolves fans were pissed. I was personally pissed we didn't lose because it's a competition we don't need another match in.
Well, before we move on to talking a little bit more about some of the other topics, I think that is a good segue for us here. This replay, like, I basically felt like it was like a hole in the head. It was the absolute worst case scenario. If you told me we could figure out a way to win this match, I was all for it. Get to the next round of the FA Cup. We'll see where it goes from there. Let's check out the draw. I can't lie, knowing that this is a road match away to Wolves that we can't afford to play midweek, to go have another road match away to Brighton that we can't afford to play at some point that might require another replay if we happen to draw, because there's replays again in the next round of the FA Cup. For me, 3 extra matches with this brittle side, no Virgil, the news that he's going to be out 6 to 8 weeks. It all makes me very, very nervous. And there's some reports today that Klopp literally might let Pep send out like a youth team at Molineux.
Fine with it.
You okay with that?
Fine
You
with
okay with it even after how he handled this round? That's the only part that frustrates me. When you don't rotate for the initial round, I almost feel like, I know he wanted a response, but he does no rotation, rolls out the same guys who have been struggling, and then
everybody's been struggling. At this point, you might as well turn to like all the veterans in the back of the room, all of our starting 11 we've run into the ground, and be like, I'm gonna send these kids. I think they probably got just to get a shot of winning. Like, I mean, like you might as well send the kids out. Maybe they'll come up with some magic. Maybe they'll come out with some grit, something. I mean, it's just like, it's so lifeless out there. Like, I don't see the benefit in any way in trotting these dudes right back out there. I don't.
So what's your prediction for this next round of the FA Cup? Do you think he will play the kids? Do you think he'll go strong, or a mixture of both?
I think it'll be a mixture of both is my feeling, because I feel like whenever there needs to be a decisive decision made one way or the other, we get a mixture of both. And like, I just feel like he'll probably go up the spine with some veteran players and then piecemeal it together. It'll be a side where we see some youth, whether it's Costas, Harvey. I feel like it's going to be a scattered mix throughout there of youth and experience.
I could see this actually being the match where he gives Doak the actual start and lets him just go out there and play for 60 minutes. He has been impressive in his little cameos, and you can see a player in there clearly. And Klopp doesn't put kids out there like that unless he thinks they can actually make an impact. But please, everyone listening to this podcast, I'm sorry if I have to offend you here, but can we not overblow and overhype another kid? Can we not, do this again where I have to hear how Harvey breaking his ankle last year is the reason our season got derailed? No, it wasn't. Our season got derailed because after 5 matches, we thought we needed a 19-year-old kid to start every match in our midfield for it to work. And then we didn't go out and replace that midfielder. So I guess while we look at the past, you brought up the parallels to Dortmund. It's been talked about many times on these airwaves, in Facebook groups that we're all in, the eerily similar comparisons, right? So this Yearsfield writer on ESPN.com.
Yeah, and I want to say before everyone's like, "Oh, ESPN," this is a German independent. I was just going to say
this is a European. Yeah. This was a European writer who covers the Bundesliga, and if you don't know this article, Google it and read it. I have some notes here, so we are going to talk about it. That's the only reason I stopped you. I didn't want to make it seem like I was.
No, you get it. I was going off on a tangent, so you saved everybody.
No. It's there are basically 5 principles to this article, and there's probably 4. I mean, we could draw parallels to all of them, but there are a couple that are just absolutely spot on. And you hit on one, and we're going to start with it. And it was bullet number 1, which was the Götze departure and the Mkhitaryan transfer, right? That was one bullet. Because to your point, for those of you who don't know, they knew, Götze was a German international, came up through the youth system. He was Dortmund through and through. Mm-hmm. Everything good about the club he was Klopp's guy, by the way.
He was Germany's crown gem.
Yeah. I mean, people forget he was the player who basically created the goal for them to win that World Cup. I mean, he was phenomenal in the match. He played great. They had a very, very big run. Scherzer got the goal and Götze did all the work. You look back on it, his injuries, absolutely kind of destroyed his time at Bayern, but he still had a good run at Bayern. He just never really hit the heights that he was at Dortmund. He was so important to Dortmund. And when he left, to your point, they didn't have a replacement in line. He left in basically a short sale where they didn't feel like they had the right amount of time. And the replacement for him at the time was Henrik Mkhitaryan, who hit the ground running, but never actually filled the job or the role that Götze did there. And
also very close to joining Liverpool at one time.
He was. And this, to me, almost brings me back, though, to it felt a lot like losing a guy like Gini and replacing him with a player like Thiago, who had all kinds of class, but did it in such a different way. And then the manager really didn't change the tactics around the players that he had. It was the same story with different components, and it has yielded different results. And that's not a shot at Thiago, but talk to me a little bit, because you started to go down that rabbit hole earlier. Talk to me a little bit about that Gini leaving and Thiago. Is it the fit, or is it the fact that the manager hasn't changed his tactics while still rolling out guys like Henderson and Fabinho that maybe are no longer supporting Thiago's great traits?
Yeah, so here's my thing. I agree. I agreed with the decision to let Gini leave. I will never favor in the side of ownership or management on extending a player on a long-term deal on inflated wages at the age Gini was at, on the length of contract that Gini wanted. So in that regard, I agreed with letting him go, even though he was obviously our most durable midfielder, was always available for matches, and I think incredibly underrated in what he brought to the side. I also agree with the Thiago purchase, because when we got Thiago, if you remember what we were talking about, he was a cherry on top. Thiago brought all this class. He was a plan B to break down teams that did basically dropped eight back in the box at times, or stacked the box with four on top of each other. He was our answer to that, our plan B to getting in, instead of just crossing endlessly on the wings from either Trent or Robbo. But the premise behind that was that we would see significant growth from Jones in that role. We never saw it, and it doesn't look like we're ever going to see it. And I thought that was relatively obvious very early on. So my assumption was that we would address the depth there and add another body. And we kept waiting, and we kept waiting, and we kept waiting. And we got one midfielder in 4 years. And it was Thiago. And I think my thing to this, the parallels to me show that you're looking at a manager who, when he looks at a squad, is so focused on those relationships and that building of that squad, he doesn't think about the next phase of what this looks like. And he is unable to physically let players age out of a squad. He's physically unable to let them rotate out, rest up to the point where they're getting few enough minutes that it makes sense for them to move on their next journey. He's unable to do that. If you look at Dortmund, it's the same thing if you look at the roster. And that's why now when you look at our starting 11, they're either early 30s and the guy behind them is early 20s. You don't have that prime asset age of 23 to 28 that you want to be the core of your squad. Those are your prime core players that you can ride minutes-wise. We don't have that. We have low 30s dudes that are aging out, and we have kids that are not ready. Honestly, let's face it. If we look at Jones, Harvey, and all those kids, I'm not sure those guys are ever going to be the quality we want. You did this when you talked about the kids earlier. We do this all the time. Ben Woodburn, Sinclair, who's now got a chicken shop in Birmingham at 23. Yeah, 23. We do this all the time as supporters. And that's fine as supporters. I get why supporters do that, but managers can't do that. Managers can't. And this is the one thing that I think Pep has on Jurgen. He takes a big-ass squad, and he protects it. He gets prime asset age players that ride the core minutes, right? He puts young players in positions. It's not blocking a path for a young player, because if they're good enough, they're going to break in. They're going to get – we've seen this with Foden. We've seen this with all the kids that came up through that system.
He's doing it right now. He started the Rico kid 3 of the last 4 matches, and in the match the other day, he yanked Cancelo at halftime and he said he actually was playing well, but tactically I needed to shift, and I needed the assets that this young man brings. He's an 18-year-old kid who is working on a youth contract playing at Manchester City. The Akanji kid walked in, was supposed to be their 5th center back. He is now a starter, starting over Kyle Walker at right back and playing at center back because it's what he does. And any one week you can see Ake out there and you're like, why is he playing? And then you realize, oh, wow, this team plays a lot of balls into the box, and Ake clears the ball with his head better than anyone on the City side. He plays tactically against his opponents. And I feel like
I just think what you're doing is you're creating a culture of competition and merit-based play that essentially makes it so that your prime assets are in a position to be protected. You're going to consistently win. Your players that are going to evolve and be these gems for you have the ability to grow into those roles. And those that aren't are sold off at a huge profit. And we used to be very good at doing that. We got away from that. And I think it's just we got away from that because I think we're in a position where we can't. I think 3 years ago, Curtis Jones, we could have sold for $30 million to a Southampton. You know what I mean? Yeah. And I think we're at a point where we're almost working backwards in the way that we view that. And I just think we talk about, it's very easy for us to say, well, we place this on owners that haven't properly backed Jurgen Klopp. And the mountain of evidence suggests that this is a manager who builds these relationships and has a very difficult time naturally evolving a team into its next iteration. And then we're stuck where we are here. And I don't know.
That's a perfect, and we're going to skip over a couple of them. We're going to kind of bounce around. We're going to go to number 4, which I think speaks to what you're talking about, which was in this writer's mind, the 4th biggest issue was no new blood. And it was basically that this guy was so in love with the players at Dortmund that he couldn't see value in buying anyone else because there was no one better. He could have bought Caicedo instead of letting him go to Brighton if he had the scouts on the street and wanted the player, right? And he could have groomed him in, and then he could have taken on the role of playing like Jordan Henderson. But in his mind, he didn't need him because he had Jordan Henderson, and behind him he had Ox, and then he always had James Milner if he needed to plug a gap. And this is the thing. We're talking about giving a 37-year-old man an extension because we don't want to buy another midfielder next year to fill a gap. We should have replaced James Milner 3 years ago. James Milner should be a player, manager, coach. He should be assisting the Leeds young guys right now.
You're coaching the U21s right now.
Wherever he wants to be. This is what we've done, and we've done it for years. I mean, listen, we could have bought a $10 or $12 million up and coming center back in the summer and groomed him into our system. So when Virgil goes down right now, we have an alternate option other than just Matip with Kanate. But instead, Jurgen's love for Joe Gomez and desire to see him get back to top flight had him help talk the board into giving him a 5-year deal instead of selling him for a profit to Steven Gerrard and helping the kid get into the England World Cup squad, by the way. But instead, we convinced him to stay. And I just don't know who's making these decisions. It might have been a little bit of Ward. I have this feeling it is a lot of FSG opinions. Klopp gets the final say. And I think it's a real reason And I think AD Ward was saying, I don't want to sit around and get blamed every time we don't buy a player or every time a player doesn't work out, when ultimately I just get to compile lists and negotiate contracts. Because ultimately the managers made it clear the right fits, the only fits are the right fit. So to a lesser extent, no fresh blood, right? Hendo, Fab, Ox, Origi, Jean, Milner. These are all guys that are either going to end their careers here or leave for free. That is way too many players leaving your club without bringing any money in, especially when you acknowledge that you don't have to sell to buy, but it comes with the budget. So right. I do want to get to one that we've talked about a little bit, which is, of course, and we've talked about it a lot, the no plan B, right? So this writer does an amazing job of actually singling out specific areas that other teams started to change their tactics around in Target. So he makes a lot of comments about how Matt Hummels was the linchpin of everything great at the back, right? But as time went on, he stopped breaking up play and moving balls forward, and he just started being targeted by specific tactics. It feels a lot like what we've seen over the last 18 months with Trent, with them just targeting that side of the pitch, targeting him specifically on aerial balls over the top. And, you know, it scares me to say this because the man's hurt right now, but to a lesser extent, I believe that people have been targeting Virgil this year with his high line because he doesn't have the breakaway speed he used to have, and he's constantly out of position. I mean, he's taken more yellow cards than I can ever remember him taking. He's making actual errors by not being able to use his size.
He doesn't seem to have the quick twitch he used to have. The quick change of direction, the acceleration. That's gone.
And that, so do we have to hang that while you're sharing earlier in this podcast that, you know, the stat about all the big chances? Isn't some of that on the manager when you've run these players into the ground and now opposing managers are targeting your best players? They're not targeting Keita when he's playing out of form with no confidence. They're targeting Virgil van Dijk and Trent Alexander-Arnold.
Look, I would say when you have the exact same back line you've had for the last 8 years and you've made no changes and that happens, that's entirely on the manager. Because it's either you change the system or you change the pieces of the system, and you've done neither. And it's not this shouldn't be surprising though. I mean, you gotta. I think a lot of us forget. I mean, not you, Gally, but I know a lot of us I think forget how massively we limped over the line last year. I mean, what the difference was. The difference was a player that we haven't had this year. It was Luis Diaz. Picked us up by the scruff of our neck after we transferred him in and single-handedly drug us over the line. And so I think it's so frustrating because, like, at the end of the day, it was all preventable. And I think we were either massively naive or massively ignorant in the summer window.
So the last bullet in that article, there is one other, the second bullet that we skipped over is the whole Lewandowski departure and bad scouting. And I didn't think that was really fair because outside of arguably Keita, there hasn't really been a really big money miss. I mean, you could say Minamino was a failed signing. You paid $7.5 million for a player from you know, Salzburg. And if it hit, it would have been brilliant. And we never really gave him a chance. And we doubled our money. So it's hard to call it a failure anyway.
I think saying bad scouting is just another word for you didn't have plan B.
And that was where I was going. That's why I kind of skipped over the Lewandowski one. Yeah. Plus, the Lewandowski thing was like an animal in a room because he kept screaming, he'll never go. We won't let him go to Dortmund, or we won't let him go to Bayern. But the problem was he was telling them, I'm running down my contract and going to Bayern. And it didn't feel that different than like Genie saying, like, I'm not going to sign for your terms. So either sell me, which he never did, or you just lose him for free. And then when he leaves, you're, you know, crying in your milk, you know, crying in your beer, which I love Jurgen Klopp. But if there is one thing, man, that man has got a goddamn excuse for his excuse. And if you call it an excuse, he'll redefine it and then tell you an excuse for why I assumed that was
and then you sort of feel conflicted about it, then hate yourself. I'm like,
yeah, and then you're like, and then I get ridiculed by everyone for calling anything out. So the last bullet, and maybe the scariest and most daunting one in that whole entire piece was bigger than the club and realized it. So when Klopp resigned on the random Wednesday right before the winter transfer window, when he did, his argument was there's nothing I can do here to fix things and nothing I can do that actually will make it better. Because no matter what, if I fix it, I'll get all the credit. And if it doesn't get fixed, they'll just blame the club. And if that's the case, I have to go. Until you sent me that link, and I've been talking about this on this pod for 2 years and kind of getting smacked by the dictator who's not here, so we got to talk about it for half the show tonight. I don't want to say out loud because, like, I actually wrote down here on my notes, "Dear Lord, no," or maybe, or maybe it's what
we're in required. The nest. There's like 4 viewers. We're in the nest. You're good.
Yeah. But I said it, though. I was like, "Dear Lord, no." But maybe it's really what's required. And you know, I live here. I've told everyone, right? I live here in Springfield, Massachusetts. I am not a Patriots fan, right? That shit is happening here right now. There are people walking around like with their head turning sideways going like, can we really do 3 more years of Belichick in this way? Like, not that he's not still the best coach that's ever coached in the NFL. And probably the best coach surely the best coach New England's ever had. But there is a time where things change. You know, I'm a Red Sox fan, and I've always said I waited my whole life for the Red Sox to win the World Series. And when Terry Francona delivered it, and then delivered 2 more, I was like, they will never replace him. And then they fired him, and 2 years later, they won another World Series with the same group of guys who quit on that guy. Because at some point, a message gets old, especially one that comes from someone with so much passion, so much vigor and anger. Is there any way that Liverpool Football Club and this next iteration requires a new set of leaders and voice? And do you think there's any way that a new ownership regime would look for that?
Oh, fuck. I hate that question. I will tell you this. I think that this current team and this current club, to reach the current heights, it needs one of 2 things. It either needs a new manager. I said it. I just fucking ripped that Band-Aid off. Or it needs Jurgen Klopp to have an intervention and make serious concessions about the way that he views his squad. I don't know. If we look at Jurgen Klopp, the one thing that we've seen is that he is consistent and stubborn to a fault throughout. And that has been to a lot of people's benefits, including ours, and it's also been to our detriment. So if I'm a betting man and I'm saying, like, you know, Jurgen is going to come and see the fact that, like, you know, you have no choice. You have to add here. You have to add there. You have to play with a certain amount of rotation throughout. You know, you can't keep spots open for 4 young midfielders come through at any given time and still have that sort of depth and quality. I don't fancy those odds. God, I mean, part of me just wishes Tchouaméni would have happened this summer because I think that would have made a huge difference in a lot of ways.
Well, it definitely would have put us in a position where we didn't have to feel so all in on Bellingham, where if you don't get him, it's literally the sky's falling.
And I do literally think he's the perfect fucking signing. Just from a culture standpoint, his family, his ability to take the captain's armband for years. He's true captain's material. He's a vintage classic throwback box-to-box mid. He's still a baby, so you've got like 10 good years in him. I think he is the perfect signing. I think that even with Tchouaméni, I think Bellingham still would have been a target. My thing is, like, if you didn't get Tchouaméni, you should have had 6 options lined up and ready to fucking go. You should have had him there.
Yeah, that's exactly where we are. So, you know, great show tonight, Paul. We are, believe it or not, already at an hour. I think we could probably go on this topic for a while because You know, we
We'd
both
just be
shared
mumbling until we both passed out under a bridge together. It's fine. Like,
pretty much, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
we have talked about this in the past, and we've gone deep into it. And it is hard because you have to be critical of something you don't want to be critical of, and you also
Right.
have to acknowledge that if that is the case, then this cycle, this rotation, this run of this, which has been so magical and so wonderful for all of us, is coming to an end. And if you aren't seeing that now, then these next 2 or 3 months, you're going to see it. If there aren't drastic improvements, this is only going to get worse. Where Chelsea is right now are not that far off of where we are. We're a couple shock results actually from being there already. Like, you know, people forget it took a stoppage time winner past when stoppage time was supposed to end to actually get that win against Newcastle, or they'd be 2 points closer to the top and we'd be 2 points further away. Like, there are already some great wins and comebacks and moments so far this year. So on that, we're going to wrap it up. Paul, you won't be with us next Monday, I believe, because I think you're traveling for work.
Nope, I'll be in Boston.
So what is the result come Saturday when we line up and have to show up at one of the hottest sides in the Premier League and play Brighton in their building at the Amex? What is the result? And more importantly, will there be a response?
I can't see this, dude. This looks to me, if I'm honest, this looks very much like the Brentford team. Like, in my opinion, in terms of like just what they're capable of from an offensive standpoint, and the fact that they play pretty well defensively. So, I mean, it's hard to see us pull on a result. If we do, I'm thinking it's like a 4-3, 3-2 result. I think there's going to be goals either way. I think it's going to be gross. I think we're going to all want to throw up on each other when we see how many chances are given consistently. So I'll go. My fingers are crossed for something like a 3-2, but I would not be shocked if we got walked off the park.
So I was going to say 3-2 and stay positive with the win. Yeah. I'm going to stick with that. Let's just say it is a gross performance, but not one where Pascal Gross is banging in goals and scoring from the penalty spot. And, you know, the idea that they're having a little trouble in their squad, you know, there's rumblings that Caicedo really wants to leave, that Trossard actually was dropped for the FA Cup match, not even in the squad. And De Zerbi said, I only want players who work hard on non-match days, which basically tells me Trossard has down tools, trying to force the move, maybe to Newcastle, maybe to Chelsea, depending on, you know, if Graham Potter still has a job by Saturday. That would not be what I would be looking to do, but we'll get to that when we come back with our iteration of the Premier League show. So quick reminders here. The guys will be back Thursday night, 8:00. Check them out. They will be covering all things Liverpool like we do here, previewing that Brighton match that we touched on right there. We'll have the fantasy show directly following it at 9 with myself and the Polish Prince, talking about all the failed mistakes we made on the first double game week just to get ready for mistakes going into another double game week. And lastly, please, if you are watching us on YouTube, subscribe now to the channel, give it a like, share it, tell us something you love about it. Hell, if you don't, tell us something you hate about it. We'd love your feedback. As always, we appreciate all the interaction, all of our viewers. Have a wonderful week. And think about it this way, people. It can only get better from here. Have a great week.